Before we get into today's episode, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Ryan, are you about to change? This show's motto has been, we're not Sky News, we don't do intro, but yet here we are with you giving an intro. And my answer to that is no. We just have to be flexible sometimes, right? We're not going to start telling you to vote for the Conservative Party and Douglas Ross on this show. We're not going that far. But we do have something a little bit different today. So at the end of last year, as you'll remember, we released a documentary on kind of Murray's neurodiversity strategy, which at the time, I guess, heavily focused around the autism spectrum. And I did say after that I wanted to use this as a way to speak to more people that are neurodiverse and get their experiences and where they think things need to change and what have you. So today is that first episode, and I was delighted to be joined by Laura and Dawn, the two hosts of the ADHD as Females podcast, which is a podcast that has went absolutely global. They reside in Aberdeen but are listened to all over the world, and they've just came back with a UK-wide tour. Now, we spoke about all the things that I've just mentioned there in terms of where things need to improve, the NHS, waiting list, diagnosis process, so on and so forth, how they experience ADHD, their community, and so on. It was a great chat. I really enjoyed talking to both Dawn and Laura. It was the first one that I'd done by myself in a while. You know, usually I've got Lee or I've got Jamie or Paul that kind of keep me company and give me a bit of support, where I was soloing this one because we're waiting for the studio to be finished, which should be within the next couple of weeks. But for now, Zoom has returned, as has the audio only. But anyway, this is enough of me rambling in my living room right now of some sort of weird intro. So without further ado, here is, I believe it is episode 86 or 87. Forgive me if I've got the wrong number there, but enjoy. So I guess I'll start with like how I became aware of you guys in the first place. Me and a few friends released a documentary at the end of last year in the local constituency I'm in of Moray, which I think is neighbouring to Aberdeenshire. I know there's like Grampian and the Highlands, and they kind of hot potato it of who takes responsibility for it a lot of the time. And someone I used to work with reached out via Messenger and whatever, and was saying, oh, you know, good job of getting out, because I was telling them at the time that I was planning on doing this later down the line and whatever. And she mentioned the acronym. And like I'd obviously never seen this before of that, so to not like quote Jez from Peep Show, I kind of thought she was having a medical brain attack at the time or something like that. And then a few days later, someone actually tagged your guys' page in the post, and I was like, I've seen that before. So I then decided it piqued my interest at this point, so I decided to look up the page, and then I actually mentioned via email that I got listening to a bunch of the podcasts that you guys have done over the last year. And I think it's awesome what you've been doing in that. And I thought,
thank you. It's very kind.
As someone that is neurodiverse themselves and hasn't really used their kind of own kind of podcast platform, as small as it is, to kind of talk about it, I thought it would be quite interesting to kind of get more people on to kind of talk about these kinds of issues and where things stands and stuff. So I guess the first question I have is how you guys met, because from what I've read and heard, this is like quite a fate-driven story, really, in terms of same moving into the same week, same age. And were you both about to go through the ADHD diagnosis process at that time as well? Because I'm pretty sure I read that you met at a barbecue. Forgive me if I'm wrong.
No, so do you want to say it?
Well, yeah, I basically moved into Fitty, and she stalked me.
Yeah. So I moved to Aberdeen. Obviously, Dawn's from Huntley, but lived in Aberdeen a long time. Hey,
yeah, pretty much most of my adult life I've been here. So
yeah, and then obviously, so Fitty is this amazing little fishing village, which is right on Aberdeen Beach, and it's very beautiful and quirky and artsy, and really lovely place to live. So Dawn was chuffed that she found somewhere here.
Yeah, I've been going through a bit of a mental health kind of crisis, and one of the things that I knew that I needed to do was move. And so when I found this place, it was perfect. It was kind of very much me. And before my diagnosis, I was very much living to other societal expectations rather than my own. So when I saw this place, it was very much like, this is me. This is, you know, breaking away from what I should be doing in inverted commas and doing something that I want to do. So I moved into Fitty, and then I was obviously excited about it, putting things on Instagram, #Fitty and all the rest of it. And that's where you came across me.
So my husband got a job here in Aberdeen. And so we moved up. We were staying in a rented place to begin with. And I was looking around like, oh, what's there to do in Aberdeen? Because very impulsively, ADHDAF, moved to Aberdeen without having ever set foot in the city. I'd never seen it in real life. The day that I saw Aberdeen was the day we moved here. So I was like, oh, what's there to do? What's nice? And I read about Fitty. So I came for a walk. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, right, this is where we need to live. Managed to find somewhere here. And it was actually a month before, but it's roughly the same time that we moved here. But it was a month before that Dawn moved in. We'd bought the house, but we're doing it up. And so I was on social media, excited to be moving to the area, started looking at the hashtag and saw Dawn saying, I've just moved to Fitty, it's lovely. And I was like, oh my God, I'm moving. We realized that we were going to be 6 doors apart. And then when I moved here, it was still restrictions for COVID. But as soon as we were allowed to socialize with people outside, I had a barbecue in our garden, invited Dawn, and literally the first thing she said was, I'm really sorry if I talk too much. I think I've got ADHD. To which I said, no way, me too. And then from that point, we both started our own diagnosis. We don't like the word journey because it's naff, but safaris. We started our own ADHD safaris. But mine had started about 2 years prior with the NHS. And I didn't hear back. And then a pandemic happened and I just kind of put it on the back burner. But when Dawn said, I'm going to start doing this, that was what reignited me getting my diagnosis. And I found out that through my husband's work, I had access to private healthcare. So then I explored the private route because I hadn't got anywhere in those years with the NHS.
I do have a question about that later on. Just mentioning there was, you mentioned there, Dawn, that you kind of felt like you almost needed to like explain that, like, sorry if I talk too much. Is that like quite a common thing, especially people that maybe don't know of their diagnosis yet, or that, to go out in public and almost, because it feels bad almost kind of having to feel like you have to explain yourself,
apologize
right?
For yourself before
Yeah.
Well, I think, for years growing up undiagnosed, I always thought, there was something wrong with me because it's like I couldn't do these regular things that most people seem to do with ease, just simple things like showering, brushing my teeth, doing the dishes, just all of these little normal things that people seem to just crack on with and get done, getting up out of bed in the morning. And so I was always shameful of that, or getting in trouble for interrupting people. And I was very aware of the things that I did, but unaware of why I couldn't control these things. And so that, going over years and years, brought a lot of shame. So I would try and hide certain aspects of myself, mask them from people so that I could fit into society. And that's what I spent most of my life doing. And then as I started going through the ADHD diagnosis process, I realized that, I didn't have to be so ashamed of these things, but there was still part of me that felt like I needed to give an explanation.
Yeah, I think also, the other element of it is, of course, is that we just went on tour, and that's called the Too Much Tour. So we are the type of ADHD, because we are all different, and even between the two of us who are nearly the same age, etc., our ADHD with the same symptoms can present quite differently and bring up different issues in our lives. However, we are both the kind of ADHD that's been told we're too much. We're too loud, we're too aggressive, we're too enthusiastic, we're too. So that is why our tour was called the Too Much Tour. But that is exactly why you would preface anything you're about to say with an explanation. You were effectively saying, sorry if I'm too much. Sorry if I talk too much. That's the first thing you said.
Yeah.
I think you make an important point there about everyone being different, right? Because from someone that's made like a documentary on this type of issue, one of the things that I see like local authorities and, services, inverted quotes, that are maybe non-existent at the moment, they always kind of seem to want like a silver bullet effect of where they want to approach everything the same. Like diversity is now in the neurodiverse kind of title, right? But they want you know, because we were speaking to like parents that had kids that were going to school and it hadn't, mainstream school hadn't went well and stuff like that. And it always comes back to, well, there's no funding. That's one thing that you hear quite a lot, or the F word I call it. But also the approach is very, very narrow, very linear.
One size fits all.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of the stereotypes with ADHD are based on, you know, young boys. And
the research is, so that's why,
all the research as well. And so not only does it differ from gender, race, all of these things,
age.
it differs from individual to individual as well.
Yeah.
Like, especially, I guess, in late diagnosis, probably even more so, because your life, how your life has been, affects you.
Mm-hmm.
So how you mask, how you deal with certain situations will be based on your upbringing.
Yeah.
Of course,
and so that in turn is how your ADHD presents.
It's going to present, because the comorbidities that you could pick up for being depressed, for being anxious, because of that shame, for all the rejection, for all the failures, etc., etc. I think also, and it's literally, and I'm not even doing this, I'm not even pretending, it has fallen out of my head and it's really important. So just give me a second and it will come back. No, it was to do with too muchness and it's literally fallen out of my head.
Don't worry, I get this all the time, and I fear freezing. Like go ahead.
So basically, one of the things that we know is, so part of, you know, we push this message that we're the same but completely different. And one of the things that we noticed was because I think that my hyperactivity is more in my brain, and it's more in how much I speak, and words just sort of fly out of my mouth. And we were in a Discord forum and somebody said the chatty one about me. And it was almost a little bit derogatory.
Mm-hmm.
And at the moment that I saw it, it really shocked me, because I was just a bit like, well, if I've just figured out, we've just got to this place where we've gone, oh, hang on a minute, we are too much for society. We are. But we're in this community and we are doing such big, bold things for the community, and we're helping and we're, you know, advocating however we can, to then be judged within the community for not fitting into what their idea of ADHD looks like. It really, it lit a fire under our asses, didn't it, really? Because it was like, no, like, we are all different and there's not one right way to be ADHD. And actually, as a community, we should all be in it together and be really aware of that. Mm-hmm. You know, that it's, you know, not that it's saying you have to listen to somebody who you think talks too much, but I am saying you should respect everybody, because that is one of the symptoms of my ADHD. So you shouldn't be ableist within that. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. And I think society subconsciously does project your difference in any kind of form as a negative, right? And I see that with how people react to me when I, like, I mean, it's not like I talk about it all the time. I'm sometimes hesitant of who I tell, because it's not maybe for me, it's how they're going to react and whatever. But I used to, when I had trouble at school and that, when I was a youngster, I used to get told I was too black and white thinking. But as I've kind of grown through the world, I've realized the world is very black and white in its thinking, you know, and mentioning there that I would get called abrupt, but then someone basically insults you in the chat, but like, oh, the chatty one, you know, like it's weird how these labels come along with these differences, but yet neurotypical or general society kind of have this kind of, you know, things that they did class as issues themselves, you know?
Yeah. And
it also makes me laugh as well that, you know, they call you the chatty one when we need you to be the chatty one. Podcast, you know? Like,
well, back then, maybe. I think times have changed, haven't they? But I'm really intrigued now. What flavour of neurodivergent are you?
So I guess it would come under the bracket of high-functioning autism, or we're not allowed to call it Asperger's anymore. So I was kind of diagnosed around 15 to 16, so I'd kind of entered this Scottish grey area of where you're no longer a child, but you're not all the way to being an adult. You're classed as like a young adult. You can learn to drive, but you can't drink alcohol, and all the kind of like in
contradiction.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm not gonna lie, like I was probably, because I was a pretty immature age as well, and I'm going through puberty and not even into adulthood yet, and I rejected it like quite heavily. I seen that as like a label, and as a result of that, the next few years of my life kind of spiraled out of control because I was I knew deep down, but it was like that kind of, I guess there's also kind of like a male kind of pride, stiff upper lip kind of block there as well, of not wanting to, not wanting to seem, and I don't see it as a weakness now, but I guess I maybe seen it as a weakness at the time. But then when I actually started reading up about I don't want to call it a condition because I don't believe in kind of framing it in those words, because I actually think that contributes to people not being able to accept who they are and their differences and things of that nature. Sorry. And then I worked in employability for a bit of time a few years later, and I was working with kids that were just coming out of school or maybe had been in the care system and that. And a lot of the people that we did work with were, on the neurodiverse spectrum, if you will. And working in employability kind of showed me that there's a great side to that, because there is people there that genuinely want to help people and find a career path for them and what they want to do. But at the same time, there's also a very heavily corporate side to that as well, in terms of it was about helping young people until it wasn't. And that threshold was met very, very, very quickly. And just hearing in the local community, like I would see like a social media post every week about my son or my daughter's been out of school for 2 years, even pre-pandemic. There's nothing being done about it. There's no support groups and whatever. So we just kind of decided to let's see what's out there and make a film about it. And we spoke to local MSP and mums. We got a few people that were on the spectrum as well. Went to a day centre for people and that. And there was some of it like I could see, because I kind of thought I'm going to go into this and it's all going to be doom and gloom because there's nothing there. But there's actually parts of that I actually regained my hope in terms of people that are there for the right reasons and are helping people. But
that's wonderful.
Anyway, I digress. We're going off on a tangent there.
Fascinating, great stuff.
So I want to ask next, how does it go from, because this friendship is only 2 years old, right? Like you met back in 2021. How does it go from meeting to then starting a podcast a year later?
Impulsivity.
Impulsivity and justice sensitivity.
Yeah, and the inability to perceive risk. all of these things.
Sometimes that's the way to be, though.
The ADHD podcast.
Yeah. So essentially, what happened was Laura has a friend who knows the one of the guys from the Adult ADHD UK. Podcast charity.
The podcast is now called the ADHD Adult.
Yes,
podcast.
That's right.
Yeah, they changed the name. Yeah.
So she said to me, she's like, "Oh, well, you'd started listening to it because it was recommended to you," and she mentioned it to me. You should have a listen to this. It's really good. It's been like the only podcast I've ever been able to, engage in and
the tone of it, because it was more like less self-helpy, even though theirs is very different to ours. It's educational, but it was like they're two mates.
Yeah. It wasn't like internet guru kind of status.
And talk about the struggles, as opposed to you can hack your ADHD. Yeah.
So basically she said, "Oh, you should have a listen to it." But before even listening or thinking, I just turned around and said, "We should start our own."
She just blurted it straight out.
Yeah.
Were you ever hesitant to do it, Laura, when that suggestion came about, or were you like in straight away?
No, because I have done a little bit of podcasting before. I did some podcasting in 2018, I think, with a friend who still has a podcast. And also from the minute that I found out what it was, the minute that I found out what my struggles were, and then found out all of these people that are suffering, that can't get the help that they need, etc., I knew I wanted to do something. So my initial reaction was to try and volunteer for the charity. I did an event which was like using the skills that I had prior. So I've been making like festival accessories and doing events, like creating an event to raise funds for the charity. But within it, all it's been about is trying to make change, trying to make people aware of what's going on, and just hoping for systemic change and hoping that we can influence it in some way.
Yeah.
So as soon as Dawn said we should do a podcast, I mean, I thought she was half joking, but she was serious. But I was like, yeah.
I think like it didn't just come out of thin air. Like the thought came from the fact that I'd listened to quite a lot of podcasts, and I just didn't feel anything that spoke to me in the way that I wanted it to. There was no one just sitting there talking about their experiences of it. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to feel like I could relate to someone. And that's what I felt was missing from some of the podcasts that I'd listened to. And so it's like, well, I relate to Laura on so many levels.
Yeah.
So if we can relate to each other whilst talking and giving that relatability out to other people, then why not?
Yeah, because there's got to be, there's the two of us brought together very randomly, then there's got to be more people like us. And the point being that quite often, in media or just in general, we are both 40 now. We are not raising families of our own. We both think we're 20 until we see the wrinkles in the mirror. Like, we are these random rebel forever children.
Yeah.
And there wasn't anybody doing that. Everybody on their podcast tends to sit up straight and say sensible things.
Yeah.
You've got us effing and jeffing and cackling like witches, and that's what we are. And luckily, we were right. There are loads of people like us. You know?
And it is a format now that is like so accessible. Like, I was just thinking about like maybe 10 years ago, if you told anyone, well, you can get your own kind of professional microphone and that, which an accessible kind of price range, people would say that you're mad. Like, you would need like this big kind of recording studio and some kind of deal with some kind of publisher or something like that. But now people can do it like simply from their phone now, right? Like, it is possible to get a good quality product.
I think it's so funny because I even thought that when we started. Like, Dawn is the technical one. Dawn knows how to do technical things, and she can deal with numbers and forms and things that I'm absolutely rubbish at. And I remember just being like, but it can't be that straightforward. Like, surely there's something that we have to do. Like, surely there's some kind of law. Or, do you know what I mean? That accessible. You can just press record, and as long as it's hosted, off you go. Yeah. It's amazing.
I guess that's so many out there.
Yeah, of course. And it's not a saturated market either, really, is it? Like, is the amount that come along, there is room for more and more and more.
And I think obviously, especially if you're doing it week by week, it's a really difficult thing to keep up. And so that's why the average podcast only lasts 3 episodes, and then the percentage of how many get to 10, it gets less and less and less.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely, having done like 6 episodes with my friend however many years ago, that was definitely how I went into it. It's like, I'm going to go into this, but I have to see it through to fruition. Like, I'm not going to do 3 episodes or 5 episodes. Like, I think we started by saying that we have to do 10. And then when we got to 10, it was like, we have to do a full year.
Yeah.
And I think like a lot of people get excited quite instantly, like, I'm going to start a podcast, and then that kind of wears off as they go on. And then,
completely, the novelty wears off.
Yeah, and then especially when you throw ADHD into the mix as well, because that is the story of my life, that I start things. What was it? I'm expert at partial arts. that was the meme I saw the other day, and I was like, yeah, that's me.
So good.
Like, start so many things but never finish anything. And I think what's really helped is not doing it on my own.
Yeah,
having someone to do it with.
We're body doubling in real life.
Supporting each other, body doubling, and it that's why we're still here.
I think, like, from my perspective, another element of it is that, like, having failed a load of times, and especially now that we speak to so many people, because we have an online community platform like Discord channel and Patreon and whatever. So we're speaking to people every day. And you're constantly kind of looking into the face of ADHD. I mean, the face is, because we know they're all different, but there are these patterns of behavior, self-sabotage, etc. And I think that's the bit that I find the hardest part, is it's so confronting.
Yeah.
Because every time that self-sabotage or something swoops in and somebody falls down, you've been that person. And so there's that other element of me that just want us all to win.
Yeah.
Like, we've all lost so many sorry, I nearly swore, so many times.
Fire on, like.
Like, I want to pull everyone along, and I want us all to win, because every time we fall down, or not fall down, every time we get the wind knocked out of our sails and we don't get up and fight back and try again, that's ADHD winning. And ADHD has taken enough from all of us. Like, I want us to win. And I really believe that together we can.
And just kind of touching on the importance of community there, and you mentioned self-sabotage as well, that can be a very, very lonely place, especially if you don't have a supportive community around you. My next question is, so the podcast starts, when did you realise that this had gained quite a lot of traction. What episode did you realise that this rocket ship had went straight to the moon?
I mean, it kind of had, but like we literally were like, oh my God, we're like winning at podcasting, like 2 episodes in. But I don't know about you. For me, it was when we interviewed Dr. Alex Connor from the ADHD Adults, and he said the words, I've seen the numbers, girls. This isn't normal. Because I have dyscalculia, like I really struggle to quantify numbers anyway, right? And so for him to say that was like, oh no, it's not just me being over enthusiastic and excited. We really are doing something that's unheard of, really.
I still think there's parts of me that don't realize. Like, it was the other day when I was doing a social media post, probably like one of the only ones I've done, because I'm not very good at the social media stuff. Laura is the whiz kid at that. But I really struggled with it. And the way my RSD affects me is that it's more like an immediate thing. Like I struggle with and people pleasing, I guess. It's the people that I care about, the people that are around me that I want to do a good job for. And so I was really concerned doing this post that I needed to get it right for Laura and also for the charity that we were working with. So that was my concern. And then someone said to me, oh yeah, it's really hard doing posts, especially when you've got such a big following. Like, you know, on our Instagram,
we're nearly at 19,000.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I realized in that moment, I was like, I hadn't put one thought into those 19,000 people that were going to see my post, because in my head, I can't see them. Therefore, it's almost as if they're not real.
Yeah. There is like a disconnect between reality and social media in that sense, right?
Exactly. And so that's kind of how I feel in the whole grand scheme of things. It's just like I can't quite grasp the enormity of what we're doing because I can't see it as a physical entity.
Which is why the tool was so bloody good as well.
Yeah.
But like definitely in the beginning, we were very, very not obsessed, but just so not overwhelmed, because overwhelmed feels negative, but definitely very numbers focused. And just because we were both struggling to take it in.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you're checking the downloads, like, really?
Yeah.
And then an hour later, that many people just an hour, like things like that. It was just us trying to grasp it, I think. But it's really funny because we're really close to episode 1 having 100,000 downloads. That is insane because episode 1 is our miserable life story. 1,000 people have listened to us whinging on about our miserable little lives. That's ridiculous.
But like you said, the relation to it, right? That's the biggest thing that people take away from these type of I say shows, but I don't want to make it sound cynical. What about the media attention? Because I noticed that you were in probably every Scottish newspaper under the sun when I looked you up on when I was doing a bit of my research and that. When did that come along? Did that come along at like a similar time? And was that a bit overwhelming?
We just fought for it. We just fought for it, and we're still fighting for it. You know, it's not something that has fallen into our lap. So we have gone out and got the coverage that we've got. Nobody approached us. We did that, and we did it from day dot, from the beginning. It's so funny. I look back at like emails that we sent to like big people having 1 week of podcasts under our belt, because it was just like, the difference being is it's not like you're saying, oh, look at us, like we're models or actresses or anything like that. It's like, this is wrong, we're not having it, are you going to help us? Because you should. And that's basically how it's felt from day dot, isn't it?
And
like,
that's what it's been about. It's like
us.
It's not about us at all. It's about 2 women being
the community side,
being really pissed off with a situation that they've been in their whole lives, and wanting to make sure that other people don't have to suffer that same way. And that's why, you know, there's so much of it when we do our interviews, we ask the same questions, and they're really, you know, they didn't happen by accident. It's really important questions. We say, like, what has undiagnosed ADHD cost you? What does it cost you? Because we want people to understand how much it costs to have people go undiagnosed and untreated. I mean, and at the same time, self-diagnosis is valid. So if people don't want to be diagnosed and they don't want medical treatment, that's totally fine. But for people like us who really did need the help, like, you know, we want people to understand why it's important. And I think, you know, the
the whole thing with the media right now and all the negative coverage, like, you know, that is exactly why we created the Anti-Ableist ADHD Media Coalition, is to try and spell it out for people. You know, I understand, and I'm saying this not in a self-derogatory way. Like, I know I'm a weirdo. I know I am, right? I am in this place where I have these ideas and they are so obvious to me. They're so obvious. And to anybody else, they sound like pie in the sky nonsense, you know, but all they do is make sense. And so for my mind, it was like, how do we spell this out? Like, how do we spell out that it's not just irresponsible, it is dangerous to insinuate that ADHD isn't real? Where is the responsibility? Where, you know, and things like, you know, we have a lot of, sorry, I realize I'm rambling now, but bear with. Like, we have a lot of people tell us in the community that they've been treated badly by their GP, for example, right? Well, you can't have ADHD because you'd be in prison by now, you know, things, you know, ridiculous things like that. And we do a bit of advocacy, and we were writing a letter the other day for somebody who sent to their GP, and it was like, to find the logic in it, to say, like, look, if you don't have compassion of this, if you don't have understanding of this, then at least have some responsibility. And here's what it looks like from your end. If the NHS is already on its knees, why are you going to let somebody go undiagnosed, which in turn is going to cost the NHS more money?
Yeah, 100%.
When their mental health is in the gutter.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's always trying to look at it every which way. Like, we have the personal, you know, rage and crusade of it, but there are so many elements of it, and we just want everyone to understand, and we want to understand because we only know it from our point of view, you know. I really don't know what you asked me, but I'm sure that wasn't the answer.
It was a good answer nonetheless. But you make a great point in the sense of, you know, when I was going through kind of like my kind of mental health stuff and that when I was a teenager, I was kind of in my own box of thinking that this is just a unique situation to me. And then when I started kind of looking at stats and stuff like that, and this is more on like the kind of autism side of things, but the average age of life expectancy for, I don't want to say someone like me, but someone that would be put in my category of, you know, high functioning is 54. You know, that's 25 years younger than the average age, you know, in the UK. And I think it's like 87% suffer from mental illness, and the unemployment, and I was like, this is absolutely shocking, you know, like, and this never gets talked about when they put things up. They will put, like, you know, not trying to get political or anything, but they'll put stuff up like how much the cost of everything is in big, bold writing. And that subconsciously says to me they're putting that out to people as these people are a burden, you know, they shouldn't be taken seriously, and so on and so forth. So I very much agree with you. And I also think, I don't want to say it's condescending, but I don't like when there's like awareness months. Why is there a month? And then, because it just goes away again, doesn't it? Like, it's not, it's like we talk about it for 4 weeks and then nothing, no action comes of it, no progress. Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of box ticking, and there's a lot of corporate box ticking as well. You know, there's a lot of, let's tick our neurodiversity box. Let's pay somebody loads of money to come and tell us something about neurodiversity when they're not actually neurodiverse themselves, and just so they can money in their pocket and we can look like we've done a good deed. It's not cool. It's really not. I don't know, it's a funny old thing, but I do think, you know, one of the other messages that we always try and push is, you know, the effect. So rather than the burden, the danger in society, and how, you know, undiagnosed ADHD can impact that. So obviously we have got like alcoholism, drug addiction, homelessness, unemployment, teenage pregnancy, even the divorce rate, traffic accidents. You know, there's all of these things. It's like, if you're talking about people and what they're struggling with being a burden, well, actually, you know, if you invest the money, if it all comes down to money at the end of the day, if you invest the money here, this is the money that you're going to save. Yeah. And
I listened to a doctor who actually is a master's in autism down in England. He was saying, and this kind of relates, I guess, into the ADHD side of it as well, that I don't believe the accommodations or things that would make neurodivergent people's lives better would cost the government that much more than what it does now anyway, with the damage that they're trying to, and it would be more successful, right? Because this damage wouldn't happen in the first place. But I think that's a good kind of time to ask about the NHS diagnosis process, because I know that's something that you guys speak about a lot in the podcasts and that, and it's actually something I've got personal experience of as well. As someone
How
that
was your experience?
well, so it was actually when I was going to counselling, and we were talking, and the counsellor didn't say I should go get assessed for ADHD, but she did point out you tend to go into a branch and ramble, and sometimes that's just because my mind decides to go in a way of its own world, and I forget I'm actually speaking to people, and it feels like I'm just talking to myself. And I was like, no, I don't think so, and then you get like a form, right? You get like a score sheet. I don't know if you guys got this when you were going through the kind of initiation kind of phase. It's so ridiculous that there's that kind of part of it. And I sat down with a family member because I was like, there's maybe stuff that I'm not picking up on that maybe someone else would.
Yeah.
And I was expecting like, oh, this will just, it'll just come to nothing. And then the family member was sat down and started pointing out things that I was like, you're right, I did do that. Like, they would be like, do you remember that time that when you were younger, I was going to teach you to cook this meal, and halfway through cooking it, you just walked off like nothing had happened? And I was like, you're right, I did do that. Like, caught. And then I went to the GP, and the first thing that they said to me was, and this is before even looking at the sheet or going through or whatever, well, there's not that much help in the area for it. And I was like, that is a very weird way to kind of start this off, is it not? And it almost seems like you try to get deterred from seeking a diagnosis,
100%. Or sometimes, different people in different areas come to us saying that they've just been told that they're not doing that right now, as if it's something that you can just take off the menu.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist here, sorry. Like, what? Yeah.
Yeah.
Or and like you said, trying to deter, there are parts of the UK where people are given their forms and then they're given a time frame within which it has to come back. So you're like wittering it out because you've actioned something, you've done part one, but you're almost setting some people up to fail.
Mm-hmm.
And so then at least you've done that bit, but they're gone and you don't have to deal with them. It's like this constant
and I can't,
off.
And I'm not sure that this is what happened, but when I first went to the NHS, it was May 2021. And that's when I was first referred. My doctor told me that they were referring me. Now, I didn't hear anything until August. And the only reason, or the only reason that I can see is why I got the letter then, is because I then chased it up.
Yeah.
So I'd gone back to them being like, what's happening with my referral? I've not heard anything. I've not had a letter. I've not had anything back yet. So am I on a list? Where am I? What's going on? A week later, I get a letter. And it just said, apologies.
You passed initiation part one?
Yeah. So it's like, was I always supposed to have to come back and ask what happened with my referral in order for them to actually refer me?
Well, I think yes, because I didn't know. I didn't know that you had to chase. I just naively thought that this would be like anything.
Well, you shouldn't.
And you go for help and they give you the help.
Mm-hmm.
I knew there'd be a way, but yeah, I never chased and I never heard back from the NHS ever.
And I mean, that was another thing that we heard during the documentary, obviously for a different difference, but a lot of people went private, which, okay, I think if people can afford that, that's great. Or in your case, Laura, that you get access to that through another
I would
avenue.
never been able to afford it at all.
It is an extortionate price, right? If you don't have that access to it, and it's forcing people to take up an American model health system, really, at that point. Yeah.
And get into debt.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is as well, because that's what we're always telling people, is like, if you feel, because it will always be that your hand has been forced effectively, if you feel that your hand is forced, that you have to now pay to get a diagnosis, be bloody sure that you've checked with your GP whether they will accept a diagnosis from that clinic. Because if they won't, then you need to find out whose they will accept before you part with your money, because otherwise that's you paying like hundreds every month for treatment because they won't accept shared care.
And that's exactly what we heard, is that some private diagnoses the NHS do not recognise, which is almost appalling when you hear stuff like that, right? In terms of
because we hear stuff like that every day.
Yeah, there just seems to be no consistency across the board for how they diagnose, even within within the NHS, within the private sector. There just seems to be no consistency and not a lot of clarity either. That was my biggest issue with the NHS. Is I got my referral. I had to chase it up. I had a therapist, a counsellor that I was working with. She was also chasing it up for me. I eventually got told in February of 2022, I think it was, that I was 4th on the list to be seen. And I didn't actually get my appointment until September of that year. So I'm not sure how it's taken, that long to get through 4 people. But that aside, I wasn't told about how my appointment was going to go, how many appointments there was going to be, what to expect. So there was no information. So it was very much just waiting. And then when I eventually got my appointment, I sat for 2 hours with a doctor that couldn't even be bothered taking his jacket off to make me feel comfortable in this room that I'm going to be sat with,
telling your bloody life story,
divulging my life story to. At the end, he then turned around and said, we'll see you in 4 months for your next appointment. And that broke my heart because I had gone in with the expectation that I would have answers. I'd already had a diagnosis of sorts from an educational psychologist because I'm at university. Mm-hmm. So I kind of knew that I had ADHD, but I can't access any help because that diagnosis isn't worth anything on paper medically. So I couldn't.
But you would at least think
that
to have some weight, some influence, right? Yeah. Especially, like we said, in a system that is broken, on its knees, understaffed, underfunded. Like, make life easier for yourselves, guys.
That's it. So I had a full report from my educational psychologist that I put to my my psychiatrist through the NHS. Put all that information through. I have every single school report from the age of 5, which a lot of people don't have, but I was in a fortunate position that I did have that. So all the evidence was there and it was backed up as well in these reports. But that wasn't enough for the doctor. They still had to put me through the full entire process. And so when I went in for that first appointment and was told, no, you need to come back in 4 months, I had everything pinned on that and I couldn't wait. And that was in the middle of the podcast as well, because we'd started the podcast obviously impulsively without even having an ADHD diagnosis. That was part of it. It's like, if I can go through this in real time, then this might be beneficial to our listeners.
And it has been, because people knew that when they went for their first assessment here,
they wouldn't get the shock,
even though they hadn't been told, just because they listened to the podcast.
And that's it. And because you'd gone through this private route, we learned so much from both of those things. Yeah. But I really wanted to see the NHS process through so that I could share the full experience. But after that first appointment, I was very much backed into a corner in that I feel like I've got no other route to go than go private because I'm struggling.
If it's 4 months potentially between what?
Yeah. And that struggle basically meant that we wouldn't have been able to go on with the podcast. Right. So we kind of reached out to our listeners, and through our community that we've built, they essentially funded.
Yeah, they paid for the diagnosis.
My diagnosis. Which I am, amazing. Forever grateful for. But as a student, as someone that lives on my own and supports myself financially, like I would have never have been able to afford a private diagnosis. So internally grateful to the community for that support.
And that's what's happened now. Is like the podcast, we get support from our community. I mean, it's not a lot of money, but it's enough to keep us going. And that means that in turn, that enables us to continue to make the podcast and support the community. So it's like a whole community project, which is incredible.
I did have a question of what benefits you get from your community, but I feel like you've just answered that at length.
It's just this circular thing that we're helping them and they're helping us, and together,
we're all together as a community.
And it's very good that like a really big positive came from a negative experience, right, through the NHS. It helped people, but also that was recycled into helping you actually getting a diagnosis through a different avenue.
And Laura, going through the private route, learned about shared care, which is something that we didn't have a clue about.
Yeah.
And
I also learned how straightforward a diagnosis can be, which further fueled my belief that things do not need to be how they are.
Yeah.
The waste of everybody's time and resources, and it's dangerous. And it literally can be that straightforward. And I genuinely believe that in my heart. Like, I know that the panorama went out and they're saying that, some people are not thorough enough, etc., etc. And as ever, I'm not a doctor. I'm only an expert by my own experience. But Are you going to tell me that I don't have ADHD? Because I definitely do. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you could find that out in 1 hour. You absolutely could. It was blatantly obvious within the first 10 minutes of the assessment that I had. And so many people in the community have told us that.
Yeah.
You know, that it was like literally walked in the door. Somebody said, you know, they went through the whole assessment. And then at the end of it, the psychiatrist said, I knew you were ADHD when you walked up the stairs.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because it can be that straightforward. It doesn't need to be this like
drawn out,
mythical thing to diagnose. It really doesn't.
And that's just, you know, it might be a strong thing to say, but that just adds damage on top of damage, right? That kind of drawn out long process, being made to feel like you're being interrogated rather than being helped.
100%, 100% there. And the truth is as well, you know, we really don't feel like it does just have to be psychiatrists that can do it. And that's why that's another thing that would take down this huge weight and clear this awful backlog of a crisis that we're currently in.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, I don't mean to be negative towards the NHS, but me and my co-host have kind of talked about similar things to do with them in terms of, you know, mental health waiting lists and other, I mean, we've seen it ourselves through other kind of assessment things, and we kind of described it as not fit for purpose at the moment. And it's kind of hard not to...
It's not. And that is the government's fault. That's not the NHS's fault. But the point being is that, you know, and again, this is me being black and white and privileged and looking at it from my very specific viewpoint. I'm not in the trenches with it, but like, surely the perfect example of this is how we do things because this is how it's always been done.
Yeah.
Which is like the most dangerous expression ever. It's like, right, this is broken. Let's think outside the box to solve the problem.
Yeah. And there's such a resistance to that, isn't there? There's such a resistance to change, which is the irony, because that's things that get targeted at neurodiverse people a lot, like, oh, they can't handle change and that. And it's like, well, projection again, right? Like,
I always think back to the thing your husband said about the Lego bricks. So he was in a team building thing, I think, with his work, and he was saying that essentially they put Lego bricks in front of everyone, a pile of bricks. But on one side, there was 3 bricks high. And on the other side, there was 4 bricks high. Mm-hmm. And they had to balance a piece of paper across the bricks to make it level. And so you've got this pile of bricks. And what's the obvious thing to do? It's to grab a brick and add it to the pile of 3 to make it 4, so you've got your level surface. That's what 99% of people will do.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on the percentages. The majority. That's what the majority of people will do. They will add a brick. So they'll complicate something by adding to it.
More work, more weight.
When they can actually achieve the same thing by taking a brick away.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. It's just like, why are we adding and adding and adding to a problem when actually
just simplify.
Take it away, simplify it, and you can get the same results.
Actually look at what you've got. How do you make it simpler? How do you make it easier?
Yeah. More effective, of course. I wanted to touch on neurodiverse stereotypes. So I don't know many for ADHD, so I'm going to rely on you guys for that. But there's one that I know that is associated with autism, and I feel like it might cross over. And it's more an assumption than a stereotype. But the thing that I hear constantly is it's more common in men.
It's more common in men, So there's a joke, right, with ADHD. What's the difference between a bipolar diagnosis and an ADHD diagnosis?
I don't know.
Men get ADHD. So the point is that because of the stereotype, which is fueled by the outdated research that's been done on little boys, white little boys at that. You know, the idea is that when a woman is presenting with ADHD symptoms, it must be bipolar. Boys get ADHD.
I mean, it's crazy that exists, right? Because it seems so. It almost seems medieval, that kind of thinking in a way, right? In the sense of, I look at it from the kind of stats point, and it's not because when we hear, the stats show that men are more common to have these kind of differences, and in reality, from what I've read, more and more women and girls and that are being diagnosed with these because their ability to mask these things seems to be better.
It's I mean, this is a stereotype in itself, but it's a trait. And there has been studies done about this, but obviously I can't remember who did them or when. But like if you have there was like a group of girls and a group of boys, right? And somebody came in and said to each group, "Are you hungry?" And the boys all went, "Yeah, I'm hungry," or some were like, "No, I'm all right." And they said to a group of girls, "Are you hungry?" And all the girls looked at each other. And one said, "Yeah, I'm hungry." And then they all went, "Yeah, I'm hungry too, actually." And it's what we do stereotypically. That's what's played out in society, is that girls mirror each other. They are also, and obviously I'm going to go there, like, we are used to putting up with quite a lot of physical pain every single month, and still having to get the job done, still having to put a face on. Like, masking comes naturally to people who have periods. Sorry to go there, but
you're
it's
taught
true.
to mask, you know, as a child.
Yeah.
Like, being brought up as female, it's like you have to, you know, be seen and not heard and all that, and like, you know, sit correctly. And you know,
as a kid, you're going to sit there with your legs open, and we all do, because it's comfortable, until somebody says, "Close your legs."
Yeah.
Wow.
It's like, be ladylike and all of these things.
I just took words out of my mouth there.
From a young age, and it's just like, well, I can't do these things that
because
are going to
make expectations.
that are going to make me look that way. So I just have to hide these things, and so like, you do mask more as a result of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's really interesting as well, like we always say, you know, we each felt like aliens. Like, we felt like aliens until we realized there was a whole planet of us. And I think it's such a, you know, part of human nature to think that you're alone in a problem. You know, especially when you think something bad happens. God, I don't know, you fall out with somebody, whatever, and you think you're the only person in the world that is going through this. And so it's funny, because it's only in learning that there are so many of us, that it's really common, that the ridiculous things that we do and the way that life pans out is actually really common for people who have ADHD, and we're all in it together. And that's how we change it. And that's, you know, that's literally why we started the Most ADHD Thing, which is a segment in our podcast where we laugh at, well, the most ADHD thing that we've done that week. And we get our followers to write it once a week, their most ADHD thing, because it's like, when you're in it, like when you stub your toe, right? In that moment, it's like, oh my God, it's so painful. But if you actually watch somebody else do it, it's like physical comedy. It's fun, right? And you've done it, so you know. And so it's exactly that. But with ADHD, is because it's like, oh no, like the next time that happens, you don't have to feel alone in it, you don't have to hate yourself, you can just laugh at it, and you can tell us about it next week. You know, brings us all together.
And I think in regards to other stereotypes, like moving away from the gender stereotypes, I think ADHD as a whole has this stereotype, and it's hyperactivity.
The mainstream view of it, I guess it would be called.
Not being able to sit still, not being able to sit still, fidgeting. I'm trying to think of the other ones. There was like kind of 4 main ones, but inability to focus, not being able to sit still, being super hyper, and being badly behaved. Essentially, is kind of like
off the walls, basically.
Kind of like the main thing. But like we had a bit in our in one of the slides that we did that has this ADHD iceberg, and it's like what you see on the surface, because you might see all those things with someone that has ADHD, but what you're missing is all of the other things underneath. So you're just seeing the tip of the iceberg, and underneath that is just all of these extra things that are added to it that everybody doesn't see because it's missed.
I think a really good example of that, even within the community, is quite a lot of the time when people introduce themselves, they'll say, I've just been diagnosed like combined type ADHD, which is a surprise to me, because I just thought inattentive. I didn't think I had any hyperactive. So even within something that you would have looked into and understand, you still will have the misconception that hyperactivity has to be physical hyperactivity, when in actual fact, it can be a hyperactive mind. It's internal hyperactivity. And
I guess that would be the equivalent for me, is when people say to me, well, you don't look autistic. And because people have an idea in their mind of what it looks like, right? And that is, I don't even think that's their fault.
I have an idea of what an invisible disability might look like. It's hilarious.
It's not even their fault, right? Because that's what society, if you Google that, right, which most people, that's where they're going to find their information these days. These are the symptoms, and these are the things that come up that make people assume. And it's when I hear from, like, even family members, I'm not trying to put people on blast by saying this, because I know that they don't mean it in a negative way, but when people say to me, oh, your issues or your problems and that, and they frame it in that negative terminology, that does not help people with accepting who they are, right? It makes them feel, oh, there is something wrong with me. Like, you know, like it is my fault. And that then adds damage, like you say, with all the other things that come into it. I am aware of our time. I have got a couple more questions about the tour and a few kind of simple ones, if that's okay.
It's because I will have witted on too much. It's fun.
So, as you have kind of briefly mentioned, you are just back off of a UK-wide tour. It was all over the UK,
Yeah, we did 15 cities in 17 days.
Wow, that must have been exhausting.
Yep.
Like,
yeah, next level.
But it was absolutely worth it. We had an incredible time.
We had the best time.
Like, is there anxiety going from doing a podcast to like doing like a live show? Like, I would imagine them. How big are like these audiences at a time?
Mixture from 16 to 130 something, right?
Yeah, I think this is where our differences really come into play, because I'm, like I said earlier, like if I can't see something, it's almost like I can't
doesn't exist. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So 18,000 people on Instagram doesn't faze me, but stick me in front of a crowd of people, that's when I get nervous and scared. And so at the start of the tour, we did our first date in Aberdeen in March before we actually went on the road. And I was absolutely bricking it.
Yeah.
Like I was petrified. I was so scared. And part of that is because of masking as well, because I was not only a way to go out on stage, but I was a way to go out on stage as me, as the real me.
Mm-hmm.
And
was that in your head? Were you thinking that as a coherent thought, or is that on reflection afterwards?
Oh, that's on reflection. Okay, yeah, that's totally on reflection. So I've sang in bands for years, and I still have stage fright within that.
Yeah.
But mostly it's the in between the songs. I don't like talking and like
because you're focused on the actual art when you're like singing or whatever.
And I think as well, it's because that's myself. That's me being me.
Yeah.
So I'd always kind of like just try and stay in performance mode and not be the real me, because I guess there's a lot of shame around who I was and my identity
and fear of rejection.
And fear of rejection. Exactly. So when we started in Aberdeen, like that was the fear. It was just like, oh no, all these people in person could reject me at any point, and I'm like being really vulnerable, and it was really scary. But by the time we finished the tour in London, like it helped me reach a new level of acceptance that I'd never been at with myself, because I learned that in being my real self, I can be accepted and I don't need to pretend to be anyone else. And that was massive. Whereas you were less nervous at the start.
Yeah, but that's to do with the city that we were in.
Yeah.
So it was only London. And I think that's probably why you were particularly nervous in Aberdeen.
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly.
Whereas by the time we got to Norwich, even though that's my city, it was specifically that show. It was
no. But I was just saying, but you were less nervous at the start.
I wasn't nervous at all. I was just excited.
Because you don't have that same struggle. The only thing
that makes me nervous is online stuff. It's the stuff between the lines, because I know that sometimes I can stumble heavy-handedly with my words. I'm doing it now. Like, I can say the wrong thing. I can upset somebody. I can. But I know what I'm about. And I know if I'm in a room with somebody and I'm looking in their eyes, even if I'm upset them, we can get there, because I'll be like, no, like, you know, it's a thing. Whereas something written down, anybody could take any opinion from it whatsoever. They could actually read it in a voice that is not your own, that is not your tone, and you have no control over it. So I feel nervous about words and posts on social media. It's all the things in between, and when you wait for a response, where your mind can go with what they're thinking about how they could respond and what you might say. That's where I struggle. But to stand in front of somebody and speak and look in their eyes is not frightening to me at all. The only other time I got nervous was when we had bright lights in our eyes, was because I need to connect with people. I want to look in your eyes and understand, or at least think I can understand what you're taking from it. And without being able to see that, it felt very strange. It felt like nobody was there.
Shine all the lights in my eyes. I want to pretend.
Blind me.
I want to pretend that anyone's there.
Yeah. I think in a way, like I'm someone that's at college to try and become a counsellor at the moment, and one thing that I've kind of realised because we have to do a lot of talks in front of class and talk about what we've learned and our own kind of thoughts and feelings on, and I know it's a cliche about the journey, And I found that very kind of anxiety ridden, and it's weird because I do this a lot, and I've done the documentary and stuff, and I've like spoke to politicians and all this kind of thing, and I was like, why am I nervous in this setting when I'm usually okay in the other ones, But the way that I kind of see it towards the end, because everyone was nervous, right? Even if they didn't show it as like I was feeling it, right? Because people were like, "You're not nervous," but on the inside, I'm absolutely bricking it. You know what I mean? And we all have. It's that my thoughts and feelings are not special and unique, and I don't mean that as a brutal put down on myself. I just mean that when you look into it and when we actually discuss these things, our thoughts and feelings are all very similar. They might just express themselves differently, right? And in terms of even like stuff like distorted thinking of, oh, I'm not good enough to do that, or oh, what happens if they think about me in this way, and all these automatic thoughts that come to our head when we don't really know what's going on right there and then from verbal communication, right?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. And I think what's funny, there's a quote by oh gosh, I've got her name now, Frida Kahlo. She said something along the lines of, we can endure so much more than we think we can. It's like that is just human beings in general. You put us in hot water or whatever, like we all have a survival instinct. We can all handle so much more than we think we can. It's just that we kind of try and protect ourselves from it. And all of the worry and stuff, I mean, obviously RSD is like a symptomatic of ADHD or whatever, but like it's all just about protection. It's all just about keeping ourselves safe at the end of the day. But actually, if it came down to it, you'd probably be all right.
And it's just, it's a consequence of trauma keeps you safe, right? Like it's throughout human history. Like we got told a story in class about people getting chased by like saber-toothed tigers all the way back in the day. And the people that weren't scared of that are now no longer with us, right? So we're ancestors of all from that kind of line of thinking. I wanted to ask, you mentioned the numbers and putting numbers to faces in a way. That was like your first kind of chance to get to do that in such a wide setting. Was that strange? Like, oh, you listen to us and now I can actually put a face to a name even though I've never met you before or whatever it may be?
It was really strange because we kept introducing ourselves to people and they'd be like, no, I know.
Yeah.
Oh no, this is our show. You paid to come and see us. You listen to us. Like,
very bizarre. But it was really rewarding to get feedback from people in our community face to face, because again, people can write it down, but it's not until you look at someone in the eyes and they explain how much you've helped them that you can really connect and understand that at another level.
It was very, very, very emotional. It was very, very emotional because a lot of people do cry, and that's like, it's not nice. We don't want anybody to cry, even if they're saying nice things. It's, we've only helped them because they've suffered so much. So even though it's a compliment, really it's about the suffering, and that's horrible. It's really sad.
But it is an emotional release, right? And we do live in a society where crying is seen as such a negative thing that people then close off to that. And that's the kind of things that make people's hearts explode, early and stuff like that, when they don't release that kind of
I mean,
emotion.
what do they say? Like depression is anger internalized. But no, it is honestly like everything. Meeting people in the community is everything. It was so wonderful. And we just really enjoyed it. And I think, when we talked about at the start, when you were saying about our sort of fated meeting, it's quite a weird thing. The show is weird. It only really makes sense to us how it kind of pulled together. And it's like our different strengths. Now, you've got two Wallies that want to play bingo, right? One of them can sing, and the other one struts about trying to get people to dance in my other festival business. So it's like, when you put all of that together, we made this thing. There were multiple points where we'd just be there. I'm singing into a ladle, like ridiculous. Activists, angry women, we just stood there like, this is the strangest thing ever. How this has all come together, and how not just on the, like in our lives, walking down the street, bumped into each other, but actually in what we've created, both in the podcast, but in the live show. It's very, very strange that our strengths and weaknesses and life experiences fit together the way that they do, and like I said, Dawn's very techie. I can barely work a computer at the best of times. I can barely log into Zoom every single day. I get it wrong somehow, right?
But the strengths complement each other, right?
Yeah, and Dawn's not confident at social media. I bloody hate it, but I can do it. I get it done. You know, it's like these weird yin and yang things that are fit together completely by fate. And now, having just gone from like being angry on a podcast, we've just toured the UK singing and dancing and dressed in leopard print. It's hilarious and ridiculous. Yeah.
But yeah, on like not a negative note, but like on a
negative note.
It was a negative note, isn't it? On the other side, like we've had to, you know, even though we have these opposite things that have, you know, made it
complementary,
that have complemented us, it's also the way our ADHD presents can make it really difficult because we both are different people. Laura's the type of person that can't sleep and she's up really early, and I'm the type of person that can't get out of bed in the morning, and Laura's the type of person that can't stop, and I'm the type of person that can't start. And so that can cause problems in itself. And so we've been up against it on more than one occasion. And what's really positive and what's really helpful is the fact that, you know, we are doing this, we are fighting for the same cause, and we care so deeply. And, you know, we're doing it.
And that's the thing, is what we said before, is I'm not going to let ADHD win.
Yeah.
ADHD can come at us every day, and it does.
And it's been,
but we're not going to let it win.
And it's been a huge learning process as well. And so in the fact that we're having to overcome these obstacles that we can't run away from them. We're having to push through. We're having to overcome any problems that hit us. It's really helped us both understand ourselves and understand each other.
And accepting them, right? Accepting those challenges that come along with it. And
exactly. Like that is the number one, is like, if, you know, we have to get to acceptance, right? You have to accept. And I know, you know, I don't want you to feel like I'm being negative, because I completely appreciate and understand what you've been saying, but like there are things that we struggle with,
of course,
like getting to a point where not just you know, write a list, speak to a coach, do some body doubling, like at some point you have to put down your stubbornness and understand that you are always going to struggle with this thing. And it's not until you can accept that you can start to bring in the systems in place to support you through it. And that is how you overcome, and that's how you win. And so that's why it's like, you know, anything like ADHD hacks, or don't look at your phone first thing in the morning, make sure you eat loads of protein and all of that stuff. It's like, that's all well and good, but like she can't get up. And once I start doing something, I can't stop doing it. So it's like, instead of just trying to eat protein and not look at our phone it away, we have to get to acceptance, and then we can go forward with it. But that is tough, because it's hard to accept that. But that's definitely one of the main messages, isn't it? So you can only thrive if you can accept the ways in which you're struggling.
It's kind of like the same with like people that go on the internet and like maybe have extreme welfare success and that, and they're just, it's just about hard work. And is it really though? Like if you look deep down into it, it's probably not just that, you know, like trying to sell to everyone, well, if you just keep working hard, no matter what you're going through, you'll be fine. But I've just got two more questions. So I just kind of wanted to, I'm kind of rolling two into one here, but you've only really known each other for 2 years, but is everything that you guys have been through, whether it be being each other's support with ADHD and the diagnosis process, starting the podcast, even the live show, has everything you've went through accelerated how close you guys are, if compared to it, I don't want to just say if it was an orthodox friendship, right? But if it had just been becoming friends from, you know, being on the same street and other stuff not being there.
Our relationship is completely life-changing, and nobody, you know, no matter what, like my husband has been here every step of the way, right? He's seen everything from when we got our first 1,000 downloads, every step of the way. But nobody knows what this feels like apart from us. Nobody knows that. You know, and at the end of the day, a lot of people come in, have tried to help us or do help us. But at the end of the day, it's still just us. It's on our heads. It's always just us. And we've had to learn and show such compassion to each other in our darkest hours and figure our ways around that, because, you know, it's like I said when I'm like, well, it's really bloody obvious. You can't just write this in the prep. like we think about that, about the way that we could perceive each other's struggles, you know, just do that. And we both know, because we're the other side of the coin, that when it's as simple as just do that, it ain't that simple.
Yeah.
And so it's like, even though it's not your struggle, you can completely relate to it in a different way.
And it was like I was saying with, you know, the conflict and stuff that we sometimes face because of our differences. I think in a regular friendship, you would probably not learn as much about each other, because if you come up against conflict, you tend to, you know, not face those things head on and not deal with them and shy away from them, maybe don't talk about them, and maybe reconvene a couple of weeks later and everything's fine.
Or just know that friend is not for that box. That's your going out friend, not your movie friend, because you don't like the same movie.
Whereas us working together, it's like, oh, we just have to get over this. We have to talk through it.
We have to figure it out
and learn from it, and, you know, listen to each other, be compassionate towards each other, and understand each other whilst still trying to understand ourselves. And that's the big thing in there, is because we've just been diagnosed, and
we're completely different people than who we were in March.
And I have at many points in my life thought I'd figured myself out and understood myself, and my biggest takeaway from all of this is to never think that, because I will always learn something else about myself that
you'll change from who you were, but based on the experiences that you have and the people that you meet, etc. But, you know, in terms of, I think one of the, you know, alongside the wins, of which there are many, which still don't feel like ours because of imposter syndrome and all the rest of it, is that, you know, it's nobody would ever understand how surreal all of this is. I think, you know, things like, you know, when things are tough, like I walk into my kitchen here, that's Dawn's house. She's right there. We literally are just sat here in fishermen's cottages on Aberdeen Beach, and we're currently listened to in 190 countries, I believe it is. Like, what? And that, you know, there's nothing that's ever going to change that. When we started doing it, we did it. We tried to get episodes out before my event, because we hoped that I could get press at the event, because I was working with another company, and that we could then push the podcast to the press that were at the event, in the hope that we could get local listeners. And by the time that came around, we were already
away with it.
The event
came in August. By August we were
I mean, it is crazy.
We needed the event for the podcast, but it was kind of the opposite way around.
It was completely the opposite way. It's a small local event, and we were already listened to all over the place. It's mental.
And it is,
and that is the strangest thing ever. To be going through the diagnosis, the late diagnosis roller coaster, as we call it, the grief cycle, but we feel it's more like a roller coaster, together on the same street at the same time, and then create this thing that's actually succeeded, is the weirdest thing ever.
And it is crazy when you look at like analytics. Like, I mean, we are absolutely not the same stratosphere whatsoever as you guys, but I've looked a few times and like, that's 10 more people in Bangladesh hearing stuff about Douglas Ross than I ever thought there would be, you know. But anyway, we'll keep his.
We haven't put out an episode for a little while. We had a break after our 1-year episode, and yesterday we just put out a surprise one,
a summer special.
Why the hell are 5 people in Texas listening to it? You know, within an hour. It's like, that's just bizarre, isn't it? Totally bizarre. But yeah, amazing. We're very lucky. We're very lucky to have been brought together, to have been so in it together, and to have people listen to us and believe in us and support us so that we can keep going. We're very, very lucky.
100%. So the last question I have, this is something that I'm getting into the habit of asking everybody, and I did kind of mention it earlier of, I believe that we have very similar thoughts and feelings, but because we don't tend to express them a lot in our head, of the automatic thoughts of, oh, am I good enough, or I overthink this or whatever. So I've gotten into the habit of asking everyone at the end of each episode when I have people on is, what is one thing that you overthink the most?
One?
Well, try and narrow it down to one.
Oh, gosh. Probably for me, I'm like, there's 2 that I'm thinking of. So the first one that popped in my head is thinking about doing things. That is just my constant, is like, I'm always thinking about what I need to get done, what I need to do. And that essentially stops me from getting anything done.
Yeah.
Because I'm constantly thinking about what I need to do and not doing it. That and thinking about how others are perceiving me. That's my,
I don't know. I feel like a future.
Yeah.
What do you think from your perspective? What do I overthink? Because I overthink everything. Yeah. So when you're asking me to pick one, that's where the issue is.
That's the thing. That is the most common answer that we've got so far. I overthink everything, and that's powerful because I think everyone is very much in the same boat. But like we mentioned earlier, thinks it's them. Thinks I'm the only one that thinks like this. So I think it's very, very interesting to know that people very much do overthink a lot in their life, because it's not something that is immediately expressed through stuff like body language and things of that nature.
It's funny because it's like there's a lot of troubleshooting that goes on, and I'm more aware of it now. But I guess it would have been a coping mechanism and a defense mechanism going about in the world. Is I'm going to walk into this situation and this person could say X, Y, and Z. And if they say X, I'll reply like this. And if they say Y, I'll reply like this. And if they say Z, and so you're arming yourself, constantly arming yourself. Something that I am getting out of the habit of, actually, because I'm aware of it now. But yeah, that's what would lend to overthinking everything. But, you know, I was thinking the other day, one really amazing thing, because you were talking about what you learned on tour. And one of the things that I've learned is to take it a step at a time. Yeah. Because we just had to. We bit off way more than we could chew. And, you know, people have whole teams to put on a tour, you know? So we're there and it's like, we've got to get from A to B. We've got to do this show. You've got to sort the sound out. I've got to speak to this person. But all of these things have to happen. Tomorrow, we have to do it all again. But all the while, somebody from next week's show is messaging and asking about the numbers of blah, blah, blah. And I've spent a lot of my life feeling really, really overwhelmed. And that is so overwhelming that I just had to stop. I just had to go, right, well, today we're doing this. And when tomorrow comes, I'll face tomorrow. And when it's the first time in my life I think I've ever done that, you know?
But it's funny you say the thing as well with like overthinking everything, but it's like you're troubleshooting.
Yes.
Because that's the same. That's exactly the same. It's like I'm troubleshooting what I should do and how I should do it. And not only that with physical things, it's with talking to people. I'm troubleshooting the right words to say and the right thing to get out. And it's just, So it is very much that, like that's constant troubleshooting inside your mind.
And it's interesting
and that, as we said, is self-protection, it's self-preservation. Yeah.
And it's interesting how these things can interlink, right? Like it might start off with, I've got to do the dishes, and then maybe you don't do the dishes and you're like, wait a minute, I've not done the dishes, now I feel bad about that. And now, wait, actually I've got to make everyone's bed, I've got to do the washing and all that. And then it just goes and keeps going and then interlinks, right? So I find it very interesting. But it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you guys. Thank you.
It's been so lovely.
Thank you so much for having us. It's lovely to meet you.
The pleasure is all mine.
Who does the editing?
Me. I am. So basically when we started, it was me and a mate, and we were quite drunk in a pub one night. And for years we were like, oh, we're going to do it. And then I think we tried to do it once with like USB microphones, and then it just, you know, excited at the start, not so much. But when the pandemic came along, I was like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to research how to actually do this properly. So we ended up getting like, you know, a bunch of kind of dynamic microphones, and then I've got like cameras, because we usually do like a video one in a studio room and that, which is, as I was mentioning just before we came on, today is where I've came on, and hence they won't see this because obviously an audio thing, but I'm wearing a hat and a hoodie in the middle of the boiling June weather. But so yeah, it just went from there, and it was like, I didn't know how to put like an audio and a video file together, and then it's went from that to becoming a professional in Adobe software, to then making a documentary, to now going self-employed as a podcast producer and making like a studio in the local area. So it's kind of arms and legs kind of grows with it. So yeah, but no, it's been an absolute pleasure, guys. Most people will know where to find you anyway, but for the benefit of people that may be listening that don't, where can people find the podcast at? Spotify, Apple, similar kind
Absolutely everywhere, wherever. So the podcast is called ADHD as Females. A lot of people call us ADHDAF, potentially, we intentionally went for the acronym. It's got nothing to do with gender, it's our experience as females, and we have a really juvenile sense of humour. But if you look for ADHDAF on a podcasting platform, you might find us eventually, but we're called ADHD as Females, and it's the same for our Instagram handle.
And it is because we're ADHD as fuck.
Yeah.
That's the end.
Awesome, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.